I'm Jeremiah Landi. So we have a string of different hardware talks that we've been given over this one. This one's specifically looking at how you do funding for startups outside of VC, right? So how you raise money, the different things, and this is kind of an unfettered talk to look at, the other side of things. Typically you hear the government or you hear ECDI talking about like all these funding sources. To kind of kick this off, most of these startups have come from, they all have come from Alloy or Ohio Life Sciences. So I wanted to kind of emphasize how big community is when starting any startup and how much they do it. So I was going to give some moments here for Alloy to kind of talk about them, and then John, if you want to come up after that.
Yeah, morning everyone. Great to see you. See a lot of familiar faces. I'm Anthony Seppi, Vice President of the Alloy Growth Lab, and as Jeremiah mentioned, we're all about collaboration. I mean, we collaborate with our startups here, our partners that I see out in the audience. Centrifuge, Cincy Tech, Main Street Ventures. We're all about collaboration, pretty selfless. But our core program is we've got a tech incubator about 10 minutes north of here by Xavier University, and we've got about 50 resident startups that we work with on a regular basis. And Steven with Noxano is one of those companies at the Growth Lab. And we're all about helping with capital, customers, and community. That's what we're all about, helping the startups get access to capital, whether it's non-dilutive, dilutive, all of those different programs that are out there. We can help them access customers and community talent. We're all about helping them with the things that they need help with in their journey. So that's the Allied Growth Lab, and thanks a lot, and happy to talk after the program.
Good morning. I'm John Snyder. I'm with Ohio Life Sciences. We're the trade association for life sciences here in Ohio, and we used to be called BioOhio. We rebranded a couple of years as Ohio Life Sciences, and so we focus on advocacy, connectivity, so connecting the industry, also advancing the industry as well. About 300 members. We're very excited about that, and we basically engage with med device, digital health, biotech, cell and gene therapy companies in the state, both startups, but also those who are at the revenue generation stage and beyond, those research institutions in the state as well, and then all the professional services agencies and organizations that touch life sciences here. And so happy to talk to anybody throughout the day. Again, Jeremy, thanks for the shout out. Appreciate it, and enjoy the session. This should be great.
Just want to start off by saying I'm Sean Parker, Executive Director of Main Street Ventures. We actually specialize in giving money without taking equity. So non-dilutive funding for startups in the greater Cincinnati area. Reach out if you have any questions or would like to learn more about funding. Thanks.
So you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Aaron Crooks, founder and CEO of Apricity Robotics. I'm actually former Procter & Gamble. I was in engineering and research and development with them for about 5 years before starting this startup. And we basically are taking robotics and automation to imaging diagnostics, and how can we do ultrasound imaging and make it accessible to all patients regardless of geographic location. And doing that through a novel robotics platform.
Andy Cothrell, been a MedTech guy for about 35 years, 20 years of corporate, and about, the balance of the years doing startups. Co-founder and CEO of Keelele Health, which is commercializing wearable biosensor tech out of University of Cincinnati. It's my 8th and final MedTech startup.
I'm Jeff Penka with Little Seed. We're based out of Columbus. We're a product development company that works with inventors in healthcare. So we start with many times in pediatric hospitals. So Cincinnati Children's is one of our partners, so is Nationwide Children's. And we help them take their idea and turn it all the way up to product. And then we launch companies with them.
Hi guys, my name is Steven Samuel. I am co-founder and COO of Noxano, and we are building advanced wound dressing devices to treat both chronic and acute wounds. PhD chemist, ex-P&G, had a bunch of ideas that I thought would be interesting to work on, and I had the opportunity to do that.
Okay, so we'll start the panel out with kind of our relationship to money and non-dilutive funding. So I don't know who necessarily, I wasn't going to call anybody out, but can somebody kind of lead off with government funding, interaction with government funding, how you've done it? Because I know when we're sold a lot, when we're doing our different startups, it's a lot of like, oh, go after an SBIR or STTR or a government grant. But there's a lot of things like reporting, percentage of landing that get left out. So does somebody want to kind of talk about the relationship with that?
We started our startup from an SBIR grant, so National Science Foundation, SBIR Phase 1. And it was actually while I was still at P&G, and as the PI on that grant, I actually had to leave P&G to accept it because they say you must be primarily employed by your startup that basically got this grant to accept it. And so that kind of forced us. I was like, this is a side hustle startup until we got the SBIR, and then it became real. And then the clock started ticking. And so that was for $256,000. And the SBIR phase 1, we applied through a entry-level pitch to them, which was a small, hey, do you like our idea? Do you not like our idea? And then if they like it, then they say, okay, you can apply for a full opportunity. And so then we applied for the full opportunity. You apply and then you just wait forever and keep checking this online portal of did we get it? Did we not get it? It's just dead silence until one day you get this list of questions that seem menacing of, okay, we hate your idea. This is never going to work, but we have some questions. And then you answer those questions as best as you can. You're basically then saying, well, they hated it. We're not going to get this grant. And then we were awarded the grant. One day I got an email that just said, congrats, you got it. Here's your program director. Time to quit your job. I was like, okay, the clock's starting. Phase 1 was actually not too bad. You kind of have to stick to your budget. We got into a bit of trouble with understanding what direct and indirect costs were with the government. They really care on, do you spend time working on this project? How do you bill time not on that project? And how do you time track? We had no idea any of that going in. So if we did it again, we would get a better, probably accounting partner that knows grant accounting to help us through that. Because when we completed our phase 1 and got into our phase 2, we went through a financial audit. So they hire a third-party CPA firm to say, let me look at your books. And when they hired that party, they sent a simple request saying, can you give us a QuickBooks report? That should have been a click of a button, but it ended up being 2.5 weeks of all-nighters trying to redo all of our books to make sure it looked how they wanted. And when you get stuff like that, it's exciting, but it's also the most stressful thing in your startup, which that really shouldn't be, right? And it's well, guess what? We didn't know what we were doing when we started this, and so then we had to do it. And now for our NSF phase 2, we're actually in a waiting stage. We had our financial review, and they said, let's wait until the election's over to see if you're going to get this $1 million or not, which we love to hear as a startup that relies on NSF funding. It's great funding, but it can also be a cautionary tale of you're on the government's timeline. Make sure you plan for that as well.
I've probably, pulled in about 20 million bucks of federal money over the years. And I think of it, when you're thinking about a hard tech startup, you're gonna fall into two camps of primary federal dollars for SBIR and STTR. And then there's other little offshoots like there's always a pediatric consortia somewhere out there that was willing to give you 50 grand, right? But it's going to be DoD or it's going to be NIH, NSF. That's 98% of the SBIR, STTRs you're going to get. DoD is a whole thing unto itself. It's not scary once you know it, but if you don't know it, it's scary. And there's flow down clauses and FAR clauses and this and that. But much like Aaron referred to getting an accountant that knows how to do grant accounting, which I also highly endorse, you get somebody that just understands DoD contracting and then it's okay. Most of my money has come from NIH and NSF. NSF is better at it than NIH. It's a less painful process. You submit a white paper and basically it's do you like my idea? And they're either no, we don't like your idea. Or they're we do like your idea. We think you should submit. And then you submit and you get your phase 1. And then the thing the NSF is the best at is if they give you a phase 1, they will just about drag your carcass across the finish line to give you a phase 2. I mean, they pump you up. They give you everything you need. If you don't get a phase 2 after you get a phase 1, it's kind of your fault with NSF. NIH is very different. I have won more general solicitations than specific solicitations with both of those. But NIH, it's hard to know whether they like your idea or not, because the program officer isn't really supposed to be involved in the decision making, even though everybody knows they kind of are. And you don't necessarily control where your submission even goes, right? So I've had something that was clearly heart, lung, blood, and it ends up in the geriatric group. And they're like, well, you think this is a dumb idea? I'm like, well, yeah, because it's not for your group, And you can express preferences, but you don't have control. And then you get the reviews back, and there's 2 great reviews, and then somebody who doesn't understand your thing just hates it. And you go through all those frustrations, and you can resubmit and all that. You can decide whether you do a fast track or not. But at the end of the day, your first one is going to be painful. And then your second one's going to be less painful. And by the third one, you're why was I ever so like intimidated by this? This is not that big of a deal. You get to the point where you're like me, you're like, I know all the general solicitation due dates for both of those agencies, and I have this catalog of ideas in my head of if we've got the bandwidth, we're going to submit, and then just account for it and get done what you said you were going to get done, and it's great money. Both STTRs and SBIRs are great money, and the big advantage of an STTR is you can use a university professor as your PI, and you don't have to quit your day job in order to do that. The disadvantage is sometimes STTRs can be a little more competitive, but it varies by agency.
I think a good point out is understanding the engagement points as well, kind of like how you guys both said. So like for the NSF, it's going through iCorps, and there's different things I think as a startup that you can go to really enhance your viability or to really kind of figure out what you're doing. Because a lot of the times, to your point, like I was just working on a maintenance schedule for an EPA grant, right? And there, it's a 32-page document, and most people look at that and go, maintenance schedule, oh, that's when I replace a filter or something. They don't realize when the government says something, there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes with it. But
yeah, another nice thing about the NSF, if you're a more experienced entrepreneur, they will excuse you from boot camp. They probably don't want me to say that, but it is possible.
So my experiences are with some other non-dilutive opportunities. So we started as a studio doing services, and what ended up happening is we kept running into inventors that wanted to create something, test it out, but they had gone and used students or interns and things like that. So they had code that couldn't go live, or by the time they were ready to license, it wasn't able to compile. And so it was a scenario where we came in as a professional group that could help them get their stuff to that line for licensing, but we started to make arrangements where we were the licensing partner and then taking it to commercialization. Part of the reason that worked well for us is we were getting paid to do work and build up that fund that would help us bootstrap. But some of the things to be aware of, if you go after things like TVSF funding in the state of Ohio, you can't pay yourself with that. Contractors get paid with that. And so congratulations, you just got 40,000 and you're not allowed to touch any of it. And so it's just understanding those nuances in the rules, I would say, on the upfront. On the back end of it, it's 2 points of feedback. I would say one is being aware of your reporting and things like that, because if you're just focused on what it is that you're doing, not understanding that you'll have regular reporting that you'll be doing for years, depending on the contract. We've started to do things where we have a contractor that we work with that helps us write grants, but also helps us with reporting, helps us with accounting. Don't underestimate that and just think, again, as a founder, I'm just gonna take that on myself. That's very big. The other bit is have a plan beyond grants, whether it's revenue positive or if it's a long timeline. Start to look at venture or other places. It's very easy to get addicted to grant cycles and finding the next project and the next project and the next project, and your product starts to suffer in that respect. So discipline's a real important thing.
what I would also ask too is you do a lot of contracts in order to fuel what you're already doing. So what you're saying with grant, I've seen a lot with startups where they kind of get into it, but then you get used to the government, you get used to your TRLs, you get used to this stuff, and it's hard to break. For you, you know, I run a consultancy. Do you ever feel that the contracts kind of bleed into your forward momentum overall? So you're pandering too much to customers or too much to outside forces and you're not really making the traction?
That's the risk, yes. So simple answer, that's the risk. It's something you have to monitor for. And if you don't have that post plan, it's real easy to feel like you hit all your milestones, but now you're back at zero. And so you always have to be thinking months ahead. It's a different way of thinking of fundraising and those kinds of things. But the other point I think both of you made well, which is it takes a lot longer than you think. Oftentimes for grants, you could be submitting 2 or 3 times and it's 18 months to 24 months. So if you're thinking, this is how I'm gonna get it urgently, that's not typically the cycle.
I think when I was up at Jumpstart VC Fest, one of the things that really stuck with me was if you need money, it's already too late. And so as I always told, the best time to think about money, to worry about money, to raise money, to get contracts is when you have money.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is, where was this panel 5 years ago? Seriously, because for us, I think our trajectory was a little bit different in the sense that I worked at P&G with my co-founders, and we were so far upstream R&D, we had the luxury of developing technologies that the military would pay for, right? So they would come and say, we need something that kills all these pathogens on a plane, and we don't care what it costs. And that technology would then get rolled into P&G brands later down the road. So my CEO had a lot of expertise in working with non-dilutive funding, even within the corporate environment. When he left P&G and I went on to do other things, when we sat down, we thought, how do we get funding for this to get this off the ground? We decided to go the SBIR route, right? Where we applied for those in the past. I think the first painful lesson we learned is that when you no longer have your P&G business card, people don't take your calls, and we submitted and they said, hey, we love your technology, but what lab are you out of? We are 3 guys in a garage buying chemicals from Michael's, right? We want to get to that next step. We were unsuccessful there. So then we thought, well, what other sources of non-dilutive funding do we have? We ended up getting into Rev 1 through Rev 1 up in Columbus, simply because we needed the lab space. At the time, we looked around Cincinnati, there was not a wet lab facility for us here, which meant a very sucky hour-and-a-half drive up, hour-and-a-half drive back. But what that allowed us to do was to engage with OSU, and there was a technology there where they were looking for someone to at least test commercial viability. And we essentially integrated that alongside our product, and that gave us access to the TVSF grants, which again, we were like, yeah, TVSF non-dilutive funding, no, you can't pay yourself. So it was instrumental in getting us from that PowerPoint to that physical prototype that people can touch, feel, and that we can show worked with actual chemicals, not just stuff you buy at Michael's. And that for us was a very key learning lesson, right? To your point of having a plan beyond grant funding, that is also something that we had looked at. You know, once the TVSF grant was starting to run low, we thought, well, how do we raise money against this idea in a very crowded marketplace? And that's when we ended up raising through angels, right? We do the same thing, right? We go to VCs, and VCs are like, wow, you have a PowerPoint and a very crude proof of concept, come back later. And that's when we went out to the angel community. And you know, we've been very fortunate to raise there. We got a lot of physicians on our cap table because they see the need for the product. But now as the company has progressed and the businesses, well, now we have 2 businesses that are growing, we've begun to look for more sources of non-dilutive funding. And right now we are engaged with the DoD, and it is, I didn't have to date my wife this hard. It's been a constant process of, you know, we've had 4 meetings with them. We've presented at the MHSRS conference at the end of last year, and there's nothing signed. There's a lot of talk about intent, right? But that's the relationship you have to go through with the DoD. So we're working on that right now. But non-dilutive funding, as a co-founder, you always think, wow, I don't have to give away any of my company. Sometimes you have to remember that 100% of 0 is still 0, right? You're gonna get to a point where you need to make that investment to ensure success moving forward to your next milestone.
That just triggered a thought too. If you're thinking DoD versus NIH, NSF, you can submit to NSF and NIH and not know anybody and be totally successful, right? You get a good review panel, get a good score, you're in. DoD is kind of the opposite. If you don't know anybody, if there's not somebody on the other side of the fence looking for your submission and pulling it in and giving it attention, it's not going to go anywhere. You're wasting your time. So you got to start with relationships with DoD.
And I just wanted to build on that a little bit, which is it's easy to sort of look at these SBIRs, STTRs, and those types of things, but looking at the community that you're a part of, and just being frank with people that you're looking for funding that can help. We're now up in the city of Hilliard, and Hilliard has a grant matching program. So if I can find $25,000, they'll match it with $25,000, and they want to grow businesses. So there are other places that you can look that help you build that whole case. So think of it in terms of, I have to hit this number, now how am I gonna get there? And how can I break it up that way?
I was always taught it's not being a greedy startup, right? So like whenever you're dealing with any of these different organizations, it's understanding the entry point. I normally push a lot of people. It used to be PTAC. It's now Apex. It's like, how do I engage? How do I get in? And we do a significant amount of government contracting as well. And it's understanding the handler, understanding where they want to go, and also intent, right? So if you're blindly submitting the DoD, the reason why they say no is that they're thinking years out, right? So if they got a drone contract, it may be something with hydrogen, right? So when you apply, you may be out there. Plus, they like to do a lot of hints in there. Like with our most recent EPA project, they put a lot of hints around shipping. So when you read through the RFP, you know, it's got things that will up your clause, and they also do points and things like that. So it's really good to know. Okay, so flip it back. once you receive a significant amount of non-dilutive funding, how does that change your relationship with dilutive funding? So when you guys went out to raise money, or you are raising money, how do you approach it? Does that mean that you're going for more now since you've already gotten $1 million or 600,000 non-dilutive, or what's the thought process behind that?
I think that matters a lot where the non-dilutive came from. So, we spoke mostly about federal money in the last round of comments, but there are lots of other sources of non-dilutive money, like you were saying, including corporate money, right? So like at Kilele, we're at 3.5 million non-dilutive now. 1.1 of that is corporate. And that gets a very different degree of credibility with an institutional investor than having NIH and NSF grants. In fact, I've had VCs that I know well joke with me like, winning NIH is almost like an anti-endorsement sometimes of the technology, right? Tongue in cheek, sort of. And so like corporate money is, as long as it doesn't come with too many strings that are going to screw up your ability to run a good exit process, is viewed as really favorable money because it's sort of a stand-in for market, right? Especially in MedTech, we can't go toss an MVP out there and see how it goes and then tweak the product. It doesn't work that way, and I don't like to go to jail. So corporates are a stand-in for representing that market validation versus the NIH and the NSF that they're not viewed as market validation. That it's great, it's free money. Don't think you're going to get to count that in your pre-money value with the institutionals. They're going to kind of blow it off. But, money's money. It gets stuff done. It gets you to the point where you can even have an institutional conversation. That's its primary value. To the extent it can be viewed as market validation because it's corporate money or some other money that is respected within the institutional investing community, all the better.
Yeah, we weren't as fortunate to get non-dilutive corporate, but we have dilutive corporate, and we actually got that through the NSF iCorps. So we started the NSF phase 1, and halfway through they give you an additional $20,000 to do iCorps through their national cohort, and we use that then to actually travel to different customer sites and do customer discovery. And we targeted customer sites that had a venture arm as well and connected through their venture arm to lead that discovery. And so the NSF paid for us to then go and actually start connecting with these arms and resulted in kind of some technology pivots that was great for us because we went, for an actual example, down to, we're a MedTech company, right? So we went down to Orlando Health, which has a venture group, worked with their venture group to take us around, and the venture group heard every single conversation we had with every physician, with every hospital CEO, CFO, and leader. And as a result, when it was time for us to go and say, okay, we made some pivots, we've got a new technology, do you want to invest? They came along that journey with us. And we used that non-dilutive funding to bring them along, and then they led our seed round. And so they said, yep, time to go, here's a term sheet. And so it made that kind of barrier to entry of, hey, we kind of have an idea. We got some NSF funding to start to prove it out. But because now they're being brought along in that journey, and we use the non-dilutive funding to do that, it made getting a term sheet for an actual venture round quite a bit easier because we didn't have to build a relationship. We didn't have to convince them. They saw us along the way. And so once we got the NSF, we started blasting far and wide saying, come on this journey with us. Kind of don't wait until you spent that money to fundraise. It's, hey, look, we're going to learn a bunch of stuff along the way. Why don't you learn with us? And then at the end of this, we're going to need money because we want to keep this company going. And I quit my job. So come with us on this journey and learn with us so that when we need money, you're ready to go. And if you like where we're heading, then let's do this as a partnership. And we were fortunate then to not have a lot of hurdles for closing our seed round with that kind of mindset to it.
I think to say this, I don't think a lot of people really think about aligning with corporations. I think a lot of people think on the exit, like, oh, I'll sell to Fifth Third. Oh, I'll sell to Medtronic. A lot of them don't say, hey, I could put a strategic partner in place now, bring them in a seed or Series A, and then maybe they'll close out one of your rounds and just buy you.
We started by thinking about revenue. And so we identified a set of customers we'd love to have on a customer list and created what we classified as an early adopter program. And basically went and told them, this is where we're going with this. We'd like you to be a thought leader in this. And for X dollars, you'll get pre-access to it and you'll basically keep getting new iterations as we were going through them. So we would scale it as small as possible, but we were charging them to come to workshops with us. On the corporate side, we then aligned with people that we thought would make good distribution partners or people that we knew we were going to bump into in the space. And we tried to get close to them, but then we charged them to be partners in that as well. And in that move, we actually identified the 4 people we thought were possible for acquisition, and two of them were fighting at the end, and one of them was the acquirer. So we actually had positive revenue going, we had customer references, and we had partners that turned into acquirers. So, you know, again, when we say non-dilutive, revenue is non-dilutive too.
I think, especially when you're making a hard product in MedTech, you really have to turn over all the rocks. You do have to turn over all the rocks. I think for us, getting from that PowerPoint to that first physical prototype, I thought that was hard. But to your point yesterday, hard is a relative term. And along this entrepreneur's journey, you're going to find out that things that you thought you could not possibly do, you're going to find a way to do it. But at the end of the day, keeping the lights on for the company is always top of mind. Again, trained as a PhD chemist, my biggest challenge in the last 5 years is going from trying to figure out chemistry to how do I keep my employees paid, right? How do I keep them engaged and working and also keeping the lights on both here and at home, right? So yeah, the non-dilutive piece is something that we have explored. I think we've barely scratched the surface. We've been working to try and get into some of these larger hospital networks, not only from an investment perspective, but also from a research perspective, right? Because again, there are different milestones in your trajectory that will demonstrate inflection points in the company's value.
There are sources of non-dilutive funding, and it's important to know those sources and how to engage with those sources and please those sources so they give you their non-dilutive money. But if you're going to pursue non-dilutive, it's a strategy. It's not just, don't think of it as just a one-off, like I'm going to do my thing and, oh, I'm going to see if maybe I can get some non-dilutive money too. Yeah, okay, go win a pitch competition, fine. But if you're serious about using non-dilutive money to bridge yourself to the point where you can attract institutional money, which for a hard tech startup is essential right now, given the current institutional investing environment, you got to think of it as a corporate strategy, right? Which means being virtual, avoiding fixed costs, right? Because if I put my phase 1 in and I get a 32 and the pay line is 31, well, I'm resubmitting that, dude, but it's going to be 4 months until I can resubmit it. Is my company burning cash in those 4 months, and is that going to kill me, or can I afford to do that, right? So you've got to be ready to roll with the timeline and the punches on the non-dilutive track if that's a fundamental strategy, and there are implications way beyond just learning about non-dilutive funding for your company.
I'll add, once we brought in institutional investors, they have taken the mindset of don't go down, like, because we brought up a corporate strategy originally of we're NSF backed, we're going to start down that. And they now almost say, once you have that institutional, if you're waiting on $1 million grant and not progressing your product, we'll give you another $1 million. And they basically said, we don't want you to wait for this grant to do something because a competitor or a strategic is now doing that thing because they're not waiting on this non-dilutive funding. And there's risks and rewards to that strategy, and I don't know that we have a right answer. The one key difference that I would recommend is if you're going to pursue a non-dilutive strategy, go through a grant writer and find one that is cheap upfront and then gets paid if you get the grant. And that has been huge for us as a company coming in without a lot of NSF or SBIR or NIH experience, because we get an email from the NSF person and I have no idea what they're asking for. It's one of these line item things. It's like, I could respond and that could crush this for us because they're going to be like, I don't know what this company means. And so I kick it off to our grant writer who gets paid if we get the grant. So it incentivizes them to keep helping us to say, hey, can you respond to this? And they draft an email, and I then send that email out, and that's been crucial.
I think the key point with the grant writer is it's like somebody that clears the mist, I find, right? So when you apply, you get responses, even in denials, where you're just like, I have no idea what they're going. And the grant writers do a great job of diving into that, exploring that. And the other thing I like is if you find a good grant writer, to your point, they help you with the strategy. So I find a lot of people when they go to the government, they have no idea what they're asking for. They're like, yeah, I'm making this product, but they also don't know about partnering, right? So finding somebody that heightens your chance, or adding different acronyms to the end of your company in order to get special priorities. And I think that grant writers really demystify the process. Additionally, we work with a pretty good grant writer out of Youngstown, and what he'll do is he'll proactively look for us, because that's how he gets paid. So he'll send us emails and go, hey, look, there's these 3 or 4 phase ones. I think you should go for them. And then he'll help us partner, because he works for a lot of people. I think it really helps clear it up. What I also find with a lot of startups is that they'll struggle to either get SBIRs or STTRs or government grants because they're not quite clear. They may be early, maybe have gone through iCorps a couple times and not really understand where it's going on. And I understand that the SBA does a lot of good things, but the SBA also makes getting loans a lot easier. So can you guys talk about why you would want to go after a loan, why you wouldn't, and kind of, is it too early if you haven't gotten your seed or angel to kind of look at that type of money?
I haven't taken a loan. So one of the things I know, though, is when you go for a government grant, they're going to look at your debt obligations to say, what is your asset to debt ratio? And if you have more debt than you have assets, they're worried that you're going to use government money to pay off a loan. And so if you're thinking about pursuing non-dilutive funding, make sure that you don't have debt obligations that outweigh the assets, and that doesn't come due in the term that you're going to be spending that grant money, because they don't want you to get this $1 million grant and then pay off all your debt with it versus do the research that they're funding. So we've kind of taken the approach of wait until at least we have enough cash or assets that if we take on a loan that has some term that would expire within the frame of non-dilutive funding, that when we go through a financial audit, we don't get dinged for having that asset to debt ratio be kind of out of whack. And that would be a reason that they would shut you down from getting a grant.
I can really only think of a couple of circumstances where I would even consider debt. One would be if I were going to do a lifestyle business that I don't intend to scale, but I can get to revenue pretty fast, and I can pledge my assets against the debt, and great. They don't want my business. They're not going to try to take my business. They just want their money, and they'll take my assets, but I'll still get to keep my business, even if worse comes to worse. The second is if I have really clear visibility to a revenue stream that I know can service that debt. Because the thing about debt is it's always ahead, unless you've got a really stupid lender, it's always ahead of equity. And that includes any stake you have in the company. It includes your investors. So if you have investors, getting them to approve debt is no small task. If you don't have investors and somebody's got first position, investors are going to look at that with a great deal of skepticism, right? You just kind of brought a skunk to the party, because they're going to, no debt is going to be like, oh no, investors can be ahead of me in line. That is never, ever, ever going to happen, ever. And I'm even shy right now of convertible debt, just because everything is taking longer than it used to take, because money's harder to get than it used to be. And if you have a convertible note that's paying interest, by the time it's time to convert that note, there could be a giant pile of interest sitting there that's going to just dilute the heck out of the founder when it converts. And so in theory, there is no fundamental advantage to debt or equity. It's circumstantial and depends on your transaction costs. But in practice, I would say these days I'm very much in the anti-debt camp.
The one qualifier I would put on that is just one of awareness. So when you're talking about line of credit, for example, make sure that you've had those conversations with your co-founders or anybody else that would need to sign off on that. I had a prior startup where I was just the guy coming in to help them turn it from services to product, and one of the partners had had a bankruptcy in the past that prevented line of credit from even being an option. In another case, we had a set of founders. We got all of our spouses and significant others into the meeting because a couple of them didn't fully understand what having a business was. And if we needed a line of credit, we needed them to be able to sign off on it, and they could stop the whole thing. And the reason we would consider a line of credit is, oh, you know this is coming in, but you need that stretch for X period of time. But it's with a plan. But be aware of those other implications, because that can be a showstopper. And next thing you know, you're rolling over. How do you take credit cards?
I will echo a lot of that, and I think for us, taking on debt has always been something that we've wanted to avoid exactly for the reasons that you've outlined. And I know that within, at least through Alloy, and shout out to Anthony Seppi, he's connected us to a lot of folks that have been able to shed light on what it looks like to be a small business and what are the types of instruments that are available to you at this point in your trajectory. I think as founders, you have to be aware of it, even though you may not want to pull the trigger on it, because as you said, the worst time to need money is when you need money, right? So yeah, we've always tried to avoid taking on debt as much as possible. And then the other piece, at least for me, that was instrumental is that starting a business as a first business, as a co-founder, you're very married in the idea, you're very married in your little hockey sticks projecting exponential growth, and you never, I would caution that you always stop to think about what does personal liability look like versus liability with the company. And I think having those crucial conversations with your, especially if you're part of a co-founding team, you have to have those conversations early because that is going to be the easiest conversation you have, because sometimes failure brings difficult conversations, but success also brings conversations that are equally as difficult.
I think I'll say this too, and I know his name gets brought up a lot, but Mark Cuban did a really good job on a talk where he talked about understanding your debt structure. So understanding like why he always tries to get money from other people rather than putting his own money in, because it's the idea of validation, right? And then once you start spending money that's too close to you, you sometimes lose to that point, like where's the line? And it's very easy to fall into heavy debt. I know a lot of people that have closed consultancies or businesses and they've lost a lot because they crossed that line. They had to make payroll, and rather than making the hard decision to say, look, we should probably lay people off rather than going to get a loan, or not coming to the realization that maybe the NSF grant's not coming next month, they just go, look, it's just another month, and you kind of string yourself along into this reality, and before long you're too underwater.
I would add to that on more than one occasion, I've run across entrepreneurs in the Southwest Ohio region that have an idea and they develop that idea, and then after their 401k is drained and they still don't have the idea fully validated and on the market, they show up, help me. And it's like, oh, dude, like that horse has left the barn. The worst, the less you need money, the easier it is to get people to give you their money. And you're kind of now in desperate straits. And there's paths forward you can find, but it puts that startup and that founder in a really bad position. And so, if that's you, stop. and you can take a little out to get to a key valuation inflection point or something, but then go get somebody else's money involved.
Well, and this is what I would say, in bankruptcy, you could shed debt. You don't get your 401k back. So I've seen people burn through $300,000. Literally, I came across a founder a couple months ago. You're not getting that back. If you go, hey, this fails, now you're a 45-year-old founder that's out on the job market trying to get lucky, and then you're starting way beyond. And so I was always told you never pull that ripcord for the 401k unless there's like a dead-on guarantee win, which is very rare, right? Or like you really are in a bad spot. Yeah. The other question I would have, and so we only got a minute left here, or 2 minutes, is can we talk a little bit about when it's too far? So when you're doing the strategy, how do you know if going down the DoD, like how do you do the quick evaluation up front to go, look, like this is going to be a whole strategy in itself. I shouldn't go after this money. So money that will kind of dilute you from your vision.
Find somebody that knows what they're doing and talk to them.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think you always have to weigh how much of my time is this going to take versus what is the outcome that I'm going to get. Life is opportunity and timing, and sometimes you have the former and you don't have the latter. So for us, we always try to make sure that we're allocating the internal resources that we have on the right things. And the DoD, we'll keep going on dates with them. They'll come through eventually. But to your point, we have a grant writer that's working on a phase 1, evaluating a phase 2 for us. So have multiple irons in the fire.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add from our perspective is we've taken grants off critical path for our product. And we have now separated out how do we get to market? How do we solve our customers' problems without the grant? And we'll keep going after grants or have our grant writer go after grants for us so we don't spend the time. But those are going to be features. on a product that we're going to develop outside of that grant structure. And so we can raise, we can push, we can pitch this critical path to market, and we're not relying on the timeline of a grant. So if it doesn't come through, that's okay. If it does, then great, we can enhance the features faster than we would if we just continued down that critical path. And so that's kind of how we have aligned that strategy as well.
So then that's our time. So thank you everybody for coming. Sorry we didn't get any questions, and have a good rest of the event.